Professor Bongo Adi is a professor of economics at the Lagos Business School, Pan Atlantic University. He's here in the studio with us. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me today.
Also with us is Juliet Benitia, who is the International Director for Training, Institute for National Transformation and Women Leadership Expert. She joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you for joining us, madam.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure being here this morning.
In Abuja today, we thought you will see you in Lagos. Anyway, you're forgiven. Then we also have Oluseyi Oyebizi, who is the Executive Director, Nigerian Network of NGOs. He joins us virtually. Thank you for joining us this morning, Mr. Oyebizi.
A pleasure.
Yeah. So let's begin with you, Prof. Do you think, I mean, we have a vague or general idea of what poverty means. So there is a general, should I say, cast for what it means. But please, from a professional perspective, help us understand, not just a socio-political, but it's from a socio-economic perspective. What does it mean to live in poverty?
Thank you very much. Well, there are many ways to define poverty, but I think the one that everybody hears of is the material deprivation, and then we see it as when people live below a certain minimum income in a day. So you can look at it from expenditure. People who spend, below what is able to give them a modicum of living, or you look at it from a consumption, perspective, or from an income perspective. You can also look at poverty from an asset. What do the poor people have, or what do people have? Recently, we've also seen the multidimensional poverty added to the mix. So when you look at it, it's all speaking to material deprivation. Okay, when people lack the basic means to survive or to sustain, a meaningful life.
Does that fully capture it?
It doesn't capture it because there are so many manifestations of poverty. And then we cannot always focus on just the correlates of poverty. So when someone is poor, the person has low income, he probably has low education, may suffer malnutrition, has low access to health, low access to sanitation, and so on and so forth. Basic social services are lacking. Okay, so that is one way to look at poverty. You can also look at it from, so you have absolute poverty, whereby no matter how you look at it, someone really lives below the line. Then you can also have relative poverty compared to other people within the same community or within the same distribution. This individual is not meeting up. So you can see it from that perspective as well. Then when we become a little bit philosophical, you can talk about freedom. Okay, when people are poor, they are not able to exert their rights. Okay, they also lack freedom of speech.
So generally, essentially, you're saying deprivation, significant deprivation.
That is it.
Okay.
Across all dimensions.
Okay. Yeah. Madam, let me bring the same question to you, but this time around, let's see exactly whether or not you think we have been addressing the problem of poverty the way we ought to a large extent. And when people are talking about addressing poverty, we're looking at what the federal government is doing. And I always say this, we seem to cut the state governments a lot of slack. Is it also to do with so that's one way to look at it. Another angle to that same question is it only what government does? Is there anything that the private sector can do also in that regard? What are your thoughts on how we are tackling poverty as a nation?
Thank you very much. Once again, good morning. The reality of poverty is an issue of the society in which we live. As Africans, or specifically as Nigerians, we have not understood the veracity and the depth of what poverty is all about. And for us, most people, they think that poverty is all about the fact that maybe you should be able to eat once a day, you are surviving, so you're okay. And so addressing poverty is actually a fundamental issue, a foundational issue, starting from the families. It's not a government issue. It's a societal issue. And I want to read from a book. It says in a book I'm reading called Financialism. When I got the invitation, I remember this book, Financialism, Water from an Empty Well. And guess what? It's written by our president in 2012 and forwarded by Professor Wole Soyinka and Reverend Jesse Jackson. And Reverend Jesse Jackson say, however, if you do not understand how economy works and how you can hope to change your status from being its victim to being one of its leaders, the reality is that one of the things I've learned over the years in leadership and understanding nation building is that we do not understand how to break the circle of poverty. We have accepted poverty and we think it should be something that should not be solved. Because from many religious perspectives, whether as Christians or Muslims, we think that poverty is something that, oh yes, it will always be amongst us. So there's no need. But right now we are in an extreme level of too many poor people. Nigeria is second to poverty today by the statistics of 2025 after India, because of India's population also. We have a population that is poor, and we think that it's okay for us to continue.
Perhaps a good follow-up question, madam.
Private sector, family sector.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My apologies. Perhaps another way to look at whether or not we've been tackling it right is, what are we doing wrong? Or do you think we've over the years we've been tokenistic about addressing poverty? Because we talk about it all the time, National Agency for Poverty Alleviation, this one, that one, and all those things. Are we being tokenistic, or you think maybe we need a broader perspective? Help us understand.
Yes, that's where I'm getting to. The issue is that we haven't been solving it because, again, solving poverty is also expensive. It's time-consuming. And so if you're a society that is just a consuming society and just surviving, you will not solve it because you do not know the futuristic importance of solving poverty. Take, for example, Nigeria has a population of over 200 million. In other words, we have people. The greatest capital on earth is not natural resources. The greatest capital on earth is human beings. And human beings are meant to be processed to become productive. The governments of the world, including the United States and Nigeria, and many African countries just copying without applying, have not sat down to look at the empirical capacity that we have to solve this problem. Solving poverty includes educational issues. Solving poverty includes opening up the economy. Solving poverty includes becoming a productive society. We are too many and too blessed to be poor.
Okay.
Because poverty is not just about economic growth.
Okay.
For example, we talked about the 100 trillion mark we have made in the stock exchange, but that does not cascade to the daily life. One of the things I've learned in the last decade, that economic growth is not equal to economic development. And so we need to merge the two. And
well,
many of
thankfully,
us as
madam, my apologies.
Beings,
Thankfully, we have an economist in the house who will help us, decode why economic growth and economic development are not in the same room. But before we come back to him, Mr. ABC, you've heard all of these. Because you work with NGOs, I'm going to have to come to you on this particular angle. There are those who are saying the demonstration of wealth or affluence in the states is because no one is holding to account the state governments as seriously as the federal government is being held by many people, including civil society organizations such as yourself. So what are your thoughts on that? Because the optics say that we seem to be cutting the state governments a lot of slack and not holding them to account. Consequently, the poverty issue is not going to be addressed where they should take action.
Well, I totally agree with you, and I think we need some level of improvement in how we engage subnational governments. Particularly when you look at the fact that many of the challenges that we have are happening at the state level, including population that are in poverty at this time. All need to now hold the government accountable to programs and initiatives that can lift many out of poverty. But we must also understand that addressing poverty is a complex issue. And this is where we need a whole of sector approach to that, including a whole of government approach as well. If you look at all of the interventions that we've seen so far, it seems that only the federal government seems to be providing leadership in addressing poverty. However, at the subnational level, we've not seen how governments are addressing that, away from some of the infrastructure around development projects that we see them doing, roads, hospitals, and all of those bits. We've not seen budgeting for social protection in ways that helps the poorest of the poor, but also we've not seen how governments at the subnational level are providing decent jobs, because it is when jobs are created at the state level that we can have that economic prosperity. And I agree with you that we have to find a way of addressing this. Okay. And we can only address this if civic space is open, meaning that I can effectively criticize my government. I mean, when Prof was talking, he said when you look at poverty as well, it means that it could also affect your rights. It's very easy for you to address issues at the federal level and you don't get arrested. Okay. But you know,
just one thing. You and Madam, you have both addressed the Prof. So, Prof, you have to respond. So, two things that both of them said I like you to, and I know that Joke has quite a list of questions as well. Madam said, tackling poverty is costly. Yeah. In other words, you have to be rich to address poverty. And then Mr. Oyebode said, Mr. Oyebisi said, tackling poverty is complex. And I saw you nod. Yes. You agree. So please help us.
Yeah, it's just like you are reading my mind. You know, there is this book, The Science of Getting Rich. I don't know if you've read that book, Wallace Wattos. That book was written in the 1920s. So, very interesting book, very small, about 60 pages. So he said that you shouldn't talk about poverty. The only way to tackle poverty is to grow rich. Okay? So that if you talk about poverty, probably you become poor. That's what Watson said. That's kind of funny. But I think we tend to restrict ourselves to this, what I call the reification of poverty, construction or creation of poverty. We fabricate poverty, make it something. Poverty is not a thing, just as the light and darkness. Darkness is absence of light, it's not. Okay? So poverty is no different from growing rich. So they are all on the same trajectory. The role of government when they make their budget is about growing the economy. So if you grow the economy, if you build infrastructure, both social and physical infrastructure, you will eliminate poverty. I mean, and I'm not sure that you can ever eliminate poverty, because even in the Holy Book, it said that you always have the poor with you. So we don't need to worry about poverty as such. We don't need to construct poverty and make it into a thing. What we need to focus on is to ensure that government policies address growth at all levels. Now, Madam made the distinction between growth and development, and I agree with her. I mean, that's a stylized fact in economics, that economic growth isn't equal to economic development. Growth simply refers to the growth in GDP. Like when she mentioned the capital market is $1 trillion or whatever, I mean naira, okay? But, you know, then the GDP is growing. But that does not translate to development. Again, there is another dimension. You can also develop without transforming. Yeah. So growth is not equal to development, and development is not equal to transformation. Okay, so these are three different layers of problems. So now, development simply means that you are tackling education, you are tackling health, right? You are tackling nutrition, sanitation, water, and so on, all these aspects of social infrastructure. Now, when he said it's a complex matter, it means that you have to approach all these things together, right? Not just one piece, because you may tackle education, maybe you solve the educational problem, everybody has access to education, but they don't have jobs. So while you are dealing with education, you also need to be anticipating where would these people be working, what would they be doing. So you need to be putting that into consideration at the same time. So for me, how do we respond to the issue of poverty? Okay, is this the reification of poverty and tackling poverty as a thing? It has never worked anywhere, and I don't think it has worked in Nigeria or that it will ever work. It won't, right? Why? Because poverty isn't a thing, right? So it is about growing rich. Let's grow the economy. Let's build the infrastructure. Let's get everybody to school and equip the schools. Let's get the hospitals functioning, right? So you increase human capital, which is manifested in health, in education, and of course, in well-being, nutrition, food. So if we invest in all of this together, and that's what government should be doing. So let's grow the economy. I agree that when the economy is growing, it doesn't mean that it's carrying everybody along. But then we need to have the economy grow before it can cascade, right, and trickle down to every member of the society. So growth is critical before you can have development. Yeah. And you need development before the economy can be transformed. Yeah.
Right. Let me come to you.
I thought this was easy.
Yeah. Let me come to you, Mrs. Benite, in our studios in Abuja. You know, quite listening to all of this, we're also talking about, you know, what we've been doing in the past. A lot of administrations have come. Now, I'm talking about the federal government now, because we've also talked about how the subnationals, you know, are really not doing so much, or they're not doing as much as they should be doing. But over the years, we've seen different administrations come up with different poverty alleviation schemes, support for businesses, support for this, support for that. Just, I think yesterday, there was a particular, I think a state government saying it's supporting some businesses and is giving them 50,000 naira and 30,000 naira somewhere to support businesses. What can that do in today's economy? What are we doing wrong? Because if we still have this level of poverty, there are certainly many things that we're not doing right.
Thank you very much. I agree to a certain degree, Professor, with a lot of the ideological issues of economy, and many which has failed across the world. And nations like maybe Singapore and even China, being a very communist nation, understood that they needed to make some shift in their economic policies and ideologies. And so even for China, who was able to reduce her poverty by 95% within at least a decade plus, between when the Millennium Development Goals issues were on to 2015 before we shifted to the SDGs. China was able to bring down her poverty level. And so when Africa talks about bringing down poverty is not an issue and is only going to be addressed in, it's going to take too much. When I say it's expensive to address poverty, what I meant is that the price, we must be willing to pay the price. For every good thing that we see in the globe and the economic indices that we see all over the world, there are prices that we need to pay. We need to invest in our people. China opened her economy and industrialization came through, but they had the products also of the agricultural products that were processed. In every product that we have as a nation, it can be accelerated to the highest level of its capacity. And for example, if you have one mango fruit, in that mango is the issue of an industry of pharmaceutical, the industry of juices, the industry of X, Y, and Z. In the petroleum, most of the Ankara today are made with petroleum, but they are coming from China. A nation must open up to productivity capacity. Nigeria, unfortunately, is a closed economy, and so the people to prosper is also a struggle. We are very hardworking people. But hard work alone without the framework of making sure these poverty issues are broken. Poverty may not be a thing as in the theoretical matter, but in the socio-economic sector, it is a matter arising. is a security issue, it is a human issue, and for every nation, God gives us human beings as capital. The number one capital is human being. But we have moved from even developing the human being to financialism. All we want to see is money, money, money. But the people, to create this economy, we have missed the point. So our own responsibility, starting from government frameworks of policy to the individual, the private sector, religious sector, must understand that the human being has the capacity to increase the measure of who or she is by production. Every one of us must be trained in a different way. Our education system is also a matter arising how we think. We think to consume rather to think to produce. So we need to begin to watch what we are doing and how do we take this so-called big issue and begin to break it down into geopolitical zone and understand how we can begin to create a new framework of a productive society. The more we produce, yes, infrastructure is necessary. Yes, roads must be built. Electricity must begin to happen, but both must happen pari passu. You can't be talking about economic development and you are minimizing, economic growth and you're minimizing development. It has to happen pari passu. It must pursue itself in the same lane. As we are going for growth, we are going for development. And we cannot close the time. Even as China was able to bridge her gap quickly, Nigeria can do the same. And so that's the matter arising for both government, private sector, and all of us who are elites, one way or the other. Our discussion level must change. It's not about criticizing the government. It's not about being critical about issue. What problem can you solve? Nigeria has one of the biggest issues. We do not know how to solve problems. So we need to start learning how to solve problems, break that black box of not being able to solve problems for too long, from one government to the other government, talking about all sorts of economic activities and events. Economic change is not about the activity and event. It's about decision, it's about the mindset, it's about how we think as a people to make the changes that are required. And we can do it. Our people are not lazy. Nigerians are hardworking. Look at the boys running up and down the street. Is that what they should be using the energy for? They should be in factories. They should be in nice schools. They should be improving. And as we do these things together, open up the economy. Government can't do anything. We are too big a people for government to be the center, what do they call it? The epic center of this activity. The private sector must come in. Religious sector must come in. Everybody must come in. Yes, we will always have the poor among us, but can we minimize that number? So that we can build a sheep nation rather than a goat nation?
Right, I quite agree with you. Let me bring this to you, Mr. Oyebisi. Quite a lot, has gone down, and she said a lot of things about, people being the resources of a nation, Nigeria or any nation. And in Nigeria, with our population, the youth, is quite a lot. Across the country, in all the geopolitical zones, we have a lot of people trying to get children off the streets, trying to get the youth back into school. We're talking about out-of-school children and a lot of those vices that are going on with the youths. Now, if we talk about the nation's population at its greatest resource, and we also have a high unemployment rate, especially with the young people. A lot of people go to universities now, yes, get educated. Yes, I'm getting an education, but when I leave the university, what next? People look for jobs, and then we also talk about jobs being created. People, when you leave university, you should have that mind that you shouldn't look for a job, but you should be able to create a job for yourself and employ other people. Where is the balance in all of this? How do we begin to reorientate even the youth population so that they begin to have that mindset of whether I go to a conventional university, I do vocational education, I must be self-productive and I must be able to empower others, which is, I think, should be the way forward for the future.
So I think the challenge again is complex. If I do not go to university today and I've gone to a polytechnic, I'm discriminated against. If I've gone to a vocational school, I'm also discriminated against. because, typically an average parent would want their wards to either go to the university and do some of these high-profile, courses. So that is why the conversation today is it's very tricky and delicate. Because when you look at all of the things that you need to do in either growing an economy or in addressing either monetary or multidimensional poverty, I think we are approaching them. However, the challenge has to do with how we are implementing them at the federal level and how we are implementing them at the state and local government level, including how we are paying attention to a couple of drivers that deepens poverty. Of course, we've said we needed infrastructure. We need jobs to grow at the rate of infrastructure. We do also need those jobs to create prosperity in ways that we can lift millions out of poverty. That means people must be doing something. We do also need an economy that can produce. And in that production is where we then need a youthful population that would get into factories, that would get into jobs, that would get into companies, that would get into government, that would get into civil society, producing something so that the economy can run. When you look at what we have now and the population dynamics at this time as well, you then begin to say to yourself, how do we get out of all of this? Take, for example, agriculture. If you need to practice agriculture today, it is practiced more in the north. But you have conflict, you have insecurity happening there, and we've not been able to solve that security problem. There are efforts, however, those efforts need to grow to scale so that farmers can go back to the farm. Now, it is within the agricultural value chain that you can also bring young people. But then go check how many young individuals are applying to our universities to study agriculture. Agriculture is not necessarily, a subject or a course that any young individual would want to, study. But it is an area where, jobs can be created easily and we can have the economic prosperity that we're talking about. If you look at the value chain, agriculture is a big employer of labor. But you also find that in today's economy, you find young people either repackaging agricultural products and delivering them as well. So we must pay attention to how the economy itself is trying to recalibrate to address poverty and begin to grow those. If you also come back to conversations around manufacturing, you need electricity. Government is addressing electricity, pumping money there, but what exactly is happening in that sector? Huge corruption. You see a lot of, companies also not doing what they should be doing. To get meter in Nigeria today is a big challenge. So while policies are working, implementation and challenges of corruption are also a big thing. So let's move away from electricity and then come to small businesses. Okay, I'm glad that we'll be discussing about the new tax law, which seems to have been able to take away challenges of overtaxation on small businesses. However, a small business today would be your barber shop, would be those doing fashion design. They still need electricity for them to be able to power their businesses. Now they have to depend on generators to service that. How do we ensure that we are able to address many of these challenges in ways that help us to grow? So that is why it's a complex web. Because again, you pay attention to who exactly would service that generator when it wears and tears. Very few people are doing that again this time. So the challenge here...
Let me ask Prof, my apologies. I thought, that while the government is doing its bit in ensuring that the needful is done and everything, and Madam also mentioned the need for private sector to come in and all, there's a question in my head about elite consensus. Do you think we have that kind of elite consensus where those who can really do understand, you know, what it takes to invest their emotions and their whatever else in ensuring that the nation is better for everyone and poverty, you know, is reduced?
Thank you for that question, elite consensus, because it keeps coming up. And why it comes up is because it's absent in Nigeria. So we do not have that. Okay, so when you talk about the consensus, is that the consensus between the politicians and the professors, the academic, let's look at the NUC, the ASU and the politicians. Is there any consensus? Can they ever have a consensus? None whatsoever. So when it comes to having some sort of, an idea or a framework of action that all Nigerians or among the elites, they are convergent, that does not exist. And when it comes to poverty as well, we don't seem to have that as well. So we have this kind of, division, okay, whereby different regions tend to have different priorities. So that is what is more pronounced. So we don't have that elite consensus. Now, when it comes to tackling poverty, the role of the private sector or individuals or the government, I studied poverty as my PhD. In fact, my PhD thesis dissertation was on poverty dynamics in Africa. I collected primary data from Nigeria and from Zimbabwe. I spent a lot of time in Zimbabwe. I spent time in Nigeria collecting data. Now, so I had to compute what is called a poverty transition matrix. Okay, over time, which families, because if you have panel data, for instance, over time, you're able to tell how many people have kind of managed to exit poverty. You notice that when people are poor below a certain level, they are no longer able to exit poverty by themselves. Okay, so that is what is called a poverty trap. Then if you look at it from a national, cross-national perspective, so which countries have managed to escape poverty in the past 50 years? You can count them on your fingers. Okay, I'm happy Madam mentioned China and maybe South Korea and Singapore and Japan. These are the countries that have managed to escape poverty since 1945.
It's interesting that they're all Asian countries.
They are all Asian countries. So no African country has managed to escape poverty. So that tells you that more than looking at it from a micro perspective, poverty is a systemic thing that has to be addressed at the state level. And from what Mr. Oyebisi said, so you could see that you require a robust and forward-looking industrial policy to address issues around poverty, whether you want is electricity or manufacturing or agriculture that you mentioned. Now today, Madam said Nigeria we are rich. I think Nigeria is a very poor country. Our per capita income, like the GDP, if you divide it by the population, is about $800 per person. Ghana is more than $2,000. Ghana. Okay, Nigeria is among the poorest African countries when it comes to per capita income, as it is today. There are countries that have $4,000 per capita income in Africa. Nigeria is just $800. Okay, so that doesn't tell you that Nigeria is a rich country in any way. Now, the national budget this year, if you put it together, is less than the budget of a corporation in water corporation in New York. I know some people may say, why do I compare apples and oranges? Okay, but let's put that in perspective. That tells you what poverty really is. So now, because we have low resources, okay, the little that we have, people now scramble over it, Okay, so that becomes a bone of contention, political issue, and all of that. So for me, okay, from an ideological, because I believe in ideology, right? From an ideological perspective, based because I have researched this over the years, I think this tokenism that we apply to poverty can never work.
So what must we do now?
Now, what we need to do is, first of all, we are lucky that we have two big companies that operate that are part of the global value chain in their sectors. The first one is Dangote Refinery, even though it's coming later. But the first is Nigeria liquefied natural gas, and then Dangote Refinery coming on right now. So what does it mean to be a part of the global value chain? It means that what you produce here is the final product is consumed somewhere else, right? So you are shipping something for consumption to the last mile, not an intermediate product, not a primary commodity, as we have always done. So how do we build an industrial policy around this so that we can create, so that will require the revamping of our educational system, our curriculum, so that we will produce and develop skills and talents to work in those industries that gives us a comparative and competitive advantage. Do you understand?
Okay.
Because that is how you can make money and then grow your GDP so that everybody will now smile. Okay. Because they say that a rising tide boils up all boats. That's the solution to poverty.
We have less than 2 minutes. Madam, your last words in 30 seconds on this thing. What must we do?
Well, what we must do, we must move from financialism back to capitalism. In the sense of, when I mean capitalism, I'm not talking about the greed that we are seeing across the world today. Every nation, especially the South Korea story, began with understanding that her people have capacity to be developed. And it is this opportunity to develop the people, to understand through curricular retraining and training of all sectors to understand that we have productive value. And finally, the economy sector, the policies around both physical and monetary, we cannot compete with nations with such high interest rates. Any nation who wants to advance in production and capacity for industrialization and export, like the Prof said, which is the end game, within Africa we have a 1.5 billion market, within Nigeria we have a 2 million market, but what is the capacity of that market? The buying power of the people are also weak. So we have to see how we can compete, even as South Korea did, as China did, and other nations have done.
Absolutely.
And even Israel, in the midst of war and issues, were able to overcome certain things.
Let me believe that not just the federal government, but the states themselves have also heard the counsel that you've given now. Mr. ABC, your last words, 30 seconds. What must we do now?
We must now focus on state governments, ensuring that the budget for prosperity and that the budget for social protection, but also more importantly, they are creating jobs at the state level.
Right. Okay.
Thank you so much for your time this morning. I like that latter part. Prof started with it, and the state governments, are very, very instrumental to ending poverty, or rather, tackling poverty in Nigeria. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here this morning. Mr. Oluseyi Oyebisi is Executive Director, Nigerian Network of NGOs, joined us virtually. Madam Juliet Benitier is the International Director for Training, Institute for National Transformation and Women Leadership expert. We appreciate your time, as well as Professor Bongo Adi, Professor of Economics at Lagos Business School, Pan Atlantic University. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
this morning, and for borrowing us some of your Zimbabwe and Nigeria data.
Interesting.